She stood frozen as James handed her the letter. "You can't. This is my home," she screamed. James smiled coldly. Not anymore. Karen's face drained of color as the officers moved toward her. But the worst part? She had no idea what was coming next. Let's start from the beginning. James Wilson had just finished mowing his lawn, the soft hum of the mower fading as he wiped sweat from his brow. The afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the freshly cut grass. He was about to head inside when he noticed a woman storming toward him from across the street. She was in her mid-50s, heavy-set, with short blonde hair and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into her face. A Karen, if there ever was one. The type of person who always seemed to be looking for a fight. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice shrill and cutting through the peaceful quiet of the suburban street. James turned, confused. "Can I help you?" Karen stormed closer, her mouth twisted into a sneer. "You need to get off this property immediately." James frowned, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry?" "This is a private neighborhood," Karen snapped. "I'm the head of the HOA, and I don't know how you got in here, but we have strict rules about loitering." James's brow furrowed. "I'm not loitering. This is my house." Karen scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh no, that's not possible." James narrowed his eyes. "And why's that?" Karen's gaze hardened. "Because we don't allow renters here. This is an exclusive neighborhood." James's jaw tightened. "I'm not renting. I bought this house last year." Karen laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Oh, honey, no. I know everyone who lives here, and I would have known if someone like you moved in." James's stomach tightened. He had heard that tone before, the condescending superiority, the coded language. He forced himself to remain calm. "I live here. I have every right to be here." Karen stepped even closer, invading his personal space. "I don't think so." James took a deep breath, feeling his temper rising. "You're making a mistake. We'll see about that." Karen pulled out her phone and started dialing. James shook his head, watching her with a cold sense of inevitability. He had been down this road before, and he already knew how it was going to play out. 10 minutes later, when the patrol car pulled up to the curb, James's chest tightened. He forced himself to breathe steadily as 2 white officers stepped out, their expressions already guarded. Karen's face lit up like she had just won the lottery. "Officers!" she exclaimed, practically vibrating with smugness. "This man is trespassing on private property. I demand you remove him immediately." James exhaled slowly, clenching his jaw. "I told you," he said. "You're making a mistake." But the worst part? He already knew they wouldn't believe him. Not yet. James stood still as the 2 officers approached, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel Karen's smug gaze boring into him from behind, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The officers' expressions were coldly professional, a look James had seen too many times before. "Sir, we received a report that you're trespassing on private property," one of the officers said, his hand resting casually on the holster of his gun. James took a steady breath, keeping his voice calm. "This is my house." Karen scoffed behind him. "Oh, please. He's obviously lying." "Ma'am, we'll handle this," the other officer said before turning back toward James. "Do you have proof of ownership?" James pulled out his wallet with steady hands, trying not to show the simmering anger beneath his calm expression. He handed over his driver's license. "The address matches." The officer took the ID and studied it. His brow furrowed. "It does match?" Karen's face darkened. "That can't be right. There's no way he could afford—" James's head snapped toward her. "What exactly are you implying?" Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying you don't belong here." James's jaw tightened. His chest burned with anger, but he forced himself to stay composed. He knew that losing his temper would only make things worse. The officer handed the ID back to James, but his gaze was still wary. "How long have you lived here?" "Over a year." Karen's eyes widened. "That's impossible." James turned toward her, his voice low and sharp. "Why is that so hard to believe?" Karen's face flushed. "Because people like you..." "People like me?" James's voice dropped dangerously. Karen faltered for a moment, but then her expression hardened. "I don't care what your ID says. There's no way you could afford to live in this neighborhood." James's fists curled at his sides. He had worked too hard, fought too long to let someone like Karen reduce him to this. Karen turned toward the officers. "Are you just going to let him stand there and lie to you?" The officers exchanged a glance. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to step away from the property until we confirm ownership." James's breath quickened. "Are you serious?" Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Told you." James stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't sure what angered him more, Karen's blatant racism or the fact that the officers were so quick to assume she was telling the truth. Karen folded her arms and gave him a look that said, "I've won." James took a slow breath, his gaze steady. "This isn't over." Karen's smile widened. "Oh, honey, it already is." James stared at her for a long moment before pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a button. "Mr. Franklin?" "Yes. I need you to confirm ownership of 320 Oak Street." Karen's smile faltered. The officer's expressions shifted slightly as James held the phone toward them. A deep, authoritative voice came through the speaker. "Yes, Mr. Wilson is the rightful owner of that property." Karen's face twisted in shock. And just like that, the balance of power began to shift. James's patience snapped. "Karen, do you even know who you're talking to?" Karen's face twisted in confusion. James pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mr. Franklin, yes. Please confirm the ownership of 320 Oak Street." Karen's face paled as James held the phone toward her. A deep, authoritative voice came through the speaker. "Yes, Mr. Wilson is the rightful owner of that property." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What? How?" James's jaw clenched. "Because I bought it from your husband. Last year." Karen's eyes widened in horror. "That's impossible." James chuckled darkly. "No, it's not. He sold the house to me to pay off his gambling debts." Karen stumbled back. "No." "Oh, and about that HOA badge you're so proud of?" James smiled coldly. HOA rules state that only current property owners can hold positions on the board. Karen's face drained of color. James stepped toward her, his eyes hard. "Which means you don't just have to leave this property. You have to leave the HOA entirely." Karen's hands were shaking. "You can't! This is my home!" James shook his head. "No, it was your home." Karen let out a choked sob as James handed her a letter. "Consider this your official eviction notice." Karen's face crumpled. "You can't do this." James's eyes narrowed. "You did this to yourself." Karen stumbled toward the patrol car, her face red and streaked with tears. The officers watched, their expressions impassive. "You're a monster!" Karen screamed. James smiled. "No, Karen. I'm a homeowner." As Karen was escorted into the back of the police car for disturbing the peace, James turned toward his house. He stepped onto the porch and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Justice had been served. Finally.